My Nerd World.
And welcome to it. I'm your host, Jon Justice, and I know that typically this is a Star Wars show, but on occasion I break away from that galaxy far, far away to talk about other parts of entertainment and the fandom and the things that I love. And this is my spoiler review, light spoiler review, of TRON ARES, the third film in the TRON franchise, which has really kind of been a strange franchise. You have the original film coming out in 1982. It took some 30 years later until we get TRON Legacy, a film that I love, really enjoy, completely rewatchable, and one that has become really special in my household. I think there is something about TRON Legacy that connected with both of my boys, now 18 and 23, more so than maybe even Star Wars did. TRON Legacy kind of serves as sort of a Star Wars tentpole film for the both of them, much in the same way that Speed Racer does. I'm just going to toss that in there. And then some 15 years later, we end up with this sequel to, and it's not really a sequel to TRON Legacy, but the third film in the franchise. I'll just say up front, I loved this movie. And I've had less than 24 hours to kind of sit on it, having just watched it on Thursday night, recording this heading into the afternoon on Friday. I don't think that I have had that wide of a grin on my face for the totality of a film in a long, long, long time. I mean, even going into my favorite films, my Star Wars movies, the sequel trilogies the sequel films that I very much enjoy, as you know, listening to this podcast. But I was highly anticipating this movie. I'm watching it with my family. This became a family experience with all four of us going together, my wife included, to see this movie, and a special moment for my boys and I because we have this bond together of TRON Legacy and the series. They're not as big of fans with the original TRON, of course. I am. That movie was incredibly important to me growing up as a kid, and I'll talk about that on the backside of my review for this film. So I was going in with pretty high expectations. I really had enjoyed everything that I had seen so far, and the sort of extended clips as the marketing campaign got underway for Disney. Clearly, they want this to be a hit. Whether or not it's going to be and we get another one, I don't know. I'm really hopeful that we do because, again, I enjoyed this film and found it completely and totally entertaining from start to finish. There's an easy metric that I'll put out there on whether or not you will enjoy TRON ARES. And it kind of goes like this. If you grew up with the original, depending on how old you are, if you grew up with the original and enjoyed that original film back in 82, and you liked TRON Legacy, then I'm confident you're going to have a good time with TRON ARES. These three films aren't Oscar-worthy movies in terms of the dialogue or the storytelling. These are spectacle films, and they should be treated as such. When I got out of the theater, when we got home, I ended up staying up probably later than I should have on a work night. But as it typically happens, I want to consume more content surrounding what I just saw and enjoyed. I want to hear other people's commentary. And while art is subjective, film, it doesn't matter. All art is subjective. The cynicism that's out there within the critics and the people that post these videos online, it's so incredibly frustrating to watch. People's expectations are so over the top, and when I go and see a movie, I set my expectations based off of the movie that I'm about to see. And going into a TRON film, I just want to be entertained. And I was 100% entertained from start to finish with this movie. And it was the first time in a long time that I found myself not wanting the film to end. And to that point, probably my biggest criticism of the movie would maybe have been the ending. It's on par with the ending of the other films. I think actually the first TRON has probably, arguably, the most sort of definitive end battle, taking out the Master Control, getting the disc into the heart of the NPC, and the explosion that ensues afterwards based off that really rudimentary CGI that they were using. We have the really emotional moment at the end of Legacy. So I will say that the end of Tron Ares was probably the weakest of the three films, but even then, the coda afterwards, where we set up potentially where we could be going in the next movie, and there is one post-credit scene that I'm not going to spoil, just in case you haven't seen it and you're okay with light spoilers. The post-credit scene, which takes place about 30 seconds after the credits roll, has me really excited, and so I'm hoping that this film does well because I want to see more films in this series. But given the fact that I didn't want it to end, I think kind of tainted the ending a little bit because I wanted more. So it wasn't that it was a bad ending by any stretch. And I had, partly my fault, I had an expectation of a larger battle taking place at the end, and it was smaller in terms of what played out. But even then, I was not disappointed and absolutely fully entertained. So let me get into a little bit of why I enjoyed this film. And then I'll talk about my history with the original Tron a little bit further. But what this film does is something that Tron Legacy didn't do. In Tron Legacy, it follows rather closely and mirrors the original film with this Alice going down the rabbit hole, where you have Sam Flynn entering into the Matrix, much like his... I'm sorry, not the Matrix. I'm sorry, I got the... You can easily go and sort of mix these two, right? The Tron came before the Matrix, and Matrix was inspired by Tron. But you have Sam Flynn going into the Matrix, into the grid, much in the same way that his father went into... Flynn went into the grid at the beginning of the original Tron. What Legacy didn't have was that real-world user communicating with the program inside of the grid. Once we get into the grid with Sam in Legacy, we're in the grid for the totality of the movie, only to come out at the end. Where in the original Tron, you had the real-world user characters that were communicating with the programs inside of the grid, wherein you had these program avatars inside of the grid world. In Tron Ares, we get back to that aesthetic, to the point where you actually have Dillinger. You have Encom split into two companies now, with Dillinger's company and Dillinger's grid. And then you also have the Encom grid. And then you have the original 82 Flynn grid that we actually revisit in this film, which was just wonderful. I mean, I don't know how else to describe it. It was just absolutely wonderful. So you have these elements from the first film without being derivative of those two movies of the, again, Alice going down the rabbit hole. Now, there is a moment where that does happen to a certain extent with Greta Lee, that's the actress's protagonist character, who eventually ends up on the Dillinger grid at some point. But we don't end up with the Crocodile Dundee, Australian in New York, fish out of water story. She's just kind of in there and has to go on this adventure and get out of the Dillinger grid. And you see some portions of that particular scene, which is just fantastic in the trailers for the film itself. So I loved the fact that we have a third Tron film that's as entertaining and visually stunning, but wholly different than what came before it. So the other films can sit by themselves and satisfy you from an angle of whatever it is you're looking for. You can go back and watch the original Tron to get the nostalgia of that original Tron for a person that grew up with that and watched that movie as a kid and actually chose that film over E.T. when my Aunt Jan took me to the movies. Because that movie got buried by the films at the time, Poltergeist being one of them, and E.T. being another one. They came out right around the same time, and Disney was desperately searching for a franchise of its own. And in some way, shape, or form, what they're doing with Tron Ares is mirroring what happened back in the 80s, while Disney is desperate to get another franchise outside of Star Wars that they can grab onto to bring young boys and men back to the theater again. And I hope that this film does it. So you can go back and watch that original Tron and be entertained by the nostalgia factor. But then you can go and watch Legacy and really get into the grid and stay within the grid world inside the computer space and go on this adventure with Sam with these amazing sequences and this incredible soundtrack by Daft Punk. And then you get to Tron Ares, wherein we get this combination where we get to go to multiple grids, not for a ton of time, but we do get to spend some time in these grids, but also spend a lot of time in the real world while we get that interaction that we lost in that middle film. The plot line I thought was interesting, simple. We have a MacGuffin in play. I'm not going to spoil what the MacGuffin is, but there's a specific reason why everybody needs this. We have some character turns that are necessary to drive the plot forward, to take what was kind of a villain protagonist and then bring him forward as being the main protagonist in this film, along with the Greta Lee female lead character. We have your enemy, and then we have other enemies that end up sort of taking over that role as the film progresses. The soundtrack done by Nine Inch Nails is absolutely fantastic. It's different, but it works for me. It worked for me within the context of the film. It's not Daft Punk, and it doesn't need to be Daft Punk. This soundtrack was very fitting for this particular Tron film, especially considering what I was describing of being inside and outside of the grid. With the Nine Inch Nails soundtrack, while still completely electronic based, having a little bit more grounding in reality than, say, the Daft Punk soundtrack did. And the Daft Punk soundtrack for Legacy was definitely an element and a product of its time. Nine Inch Nails is experiencing a bit of a resurgence right now as Trent Reznor aligns himself with Atticus Ross, the musician, and has for quite a few years now, and have been scoring a lot of films. And there's moments in the soundtrack for Tron Ares that reminds me of probably my favorite Trent Reznor, Atticus Ross soundtrack, and that would be for The Social Network. So the soundtrack absolutely works, and the visual sequences, guys, they're stunning. Light cycles in the real world was more entertaining than I could have imagined or hoped for. And then we get these sequences inside of the grids that are just incredible. There's a sequence in the early part of the film where there is hacking that is being done between these two companies and trying to get into the computer files of a rival company. And this is where you get into the original Tron story beats, where you have a user on the outside that's doing the hacking, but he's deploying these programs into the grid that are breaking into this facility inside the grid. And so you get this battle that ensues with these different programs. They have their disks that they're fighting with, all of the different weapons within the Tron universe. And I didn't know this until rewatching the documentary for the original Tron as of late, but the original creator of the first Tron and the director, Lisberger, he had chosen specifically not to use guns and not to have the programs have firearms because he wanted something different in the film and something that was a little bit more kid-friendly at the time. So he chose to have these, he went kind of with the Frisbee aesthetic with these discs. They're lethal in the films, and certainly lethal and more lethal in Tron Legacy than they were, in Tron Ares than they were in the other films as well. We have a breaking out of the grid moment on the Dillinger grid, which is the all-red grid that you see within the trailers. And there's a sequence from that breaking out moment in the trailers, and the entirety of that sequence is just absolutely just spectacular. So great. And again, the finale is good too. A lot of what you see in the trailers is coming from the finale of the film, but the writing isn't, I'm not looking for Oscar-worthy Oppenheimer, Christopher Nolan-esque, Scorsese, whatever. We're not looking for an Oscar for screenplays for a Tron film. These are visually, aesthetically pleasing spectacle films, but it works. There are a ton of callbacks for those that are familiar like I am with the original Tron in this film, which again just had me smiling wide throughout the entire movie. If you are familiar with me at all, you know that I'm a massive Depeche Mode fan. I've been a fan of that band since going back to 85, and I'm in large part a fan of Depeche Mode because of the original Tron. I kind of leaned in towards Tron after Star Wars being released, and I was a fan of Star Wars before I was a fan of anything else. Now into science fiction, science fantasy because of Star Wars. I'm 10, 11, 12 years old. I see Tron. It's just this visual feast for a kid, almost preteen, I think, at that point in time, with this soundtrack for the original Tron that I'm just completely unfamiliar with, this electronic music that I love. And I end up discovering Depeche Mode within those years of Tron coming out, and I think it's in large part because of how much I fell in love with the Tron soundtrack. There are portions of the original Tron soundtrack that I can't think about without thinking of Disneyland because of the promotion around that original Tron film and going to Disneyland, living in Southern California as a kid, going on the People Mover, and wherein there's a portion of the People Mover where, while the People Mover is, going at 5, 10 miles an hour, if that, but you go into this long hallway room and they have images of the light cycles flashing by you to simulate motion. And, you have now entered the grid. You have now escaped the grid. I remember that from when I was a kid going to the parks and having my fandom of Tron colliding with my enjoyment and love of Disneyland at a young age with each other. It's just all straight up nostalgia fuel. And then going into Tron Legacy, of course, and like I said, the connection that my boys have with it as well. So if you're a fan of that original film and know that film like I do, there are so many various little callbacks and Easter eggs in Tron ARES that just are absolutely delightful. And even a needle drop of a Depeche Mode song and 2 different separate conversations about my beloved band in the film, especially one where it is the core of the conversation for 90 seconds that is being had between 2 main characters of the film that I was just absolutely blown away by. I understand people's criticism and why people don't like it. And I know there is a stigma that surrounds Jared Leto that I don't care about. Just like I don't care about the political leanings for the most part of actors and actresses, and I don't base whether or not I enjoy a film on that, even though I, am a conservative talk show host. I don't care. If it doesn't affect the story, then it doesn't matter to me. But I will say that this film has no agenda at all. It was refreshing to watch a movie that had no language, nothing explicit whatsoever, wasn't trying to speak some sort of message on really any level. I saw some individuals that were leaning into a climate change part of it, and you know what? You could read into it maybe, but for me, we need more films like this that are just out there to just entertain. And at a time when the movie theater industry is struggling mightily, I mean, we noticed this when we went to the movie because they're running commercials now even before we get to the trailers, and I don't care. I know now that I can arrive 20 minutes after the intended start time of the movie, and I'll get there with plenty of time to see the film. But I also understand that these movie theaters, even an AMC, they need to make their money too. And if they need to sell ads and put them on the big screen 20 minutes before the film starts, I'm totally okay with that because I want movies to survive. And it's films like this that are going to bring people to the theater. Melinda and I were watching, my wife, we were watching Practical Magic going back to the 90s. We were watching it just this week as part of our Halloween movies. And I don't believe I'd ever seen it before. Nicole Kidman and Sandra Bullock. Simple, straightforward, hour and 45-minute film. Really enjoyable, right? But I told Melinda, I said, this was a really good movie. But you're not going to see this end up on the big screen anymore. Because people don't go to see movies like this. This gets turned into something that gets thrown onto a cable network or onto a streaming platform. And, a small fraction of the viewing audience ends up watching it. It doesn't get made to put on the big screen anymore. These used to be movies that would draw people to the theater, and they're not. We need to have big spectacles like this in a movie like Tron ARES that demands to be seen in a movie theater. Once the 2 characters, the main protagonists and ARES, get together, their connection is really enjoyable. And I thought Jared Leto was great in the role. It was one of the few times that I kind of went in with cautious optimism. Jared Leto's not my favorite actor, but I do enjoy him, and I like his music as well. And I was like, oh, I'm actually really enjoying him being on screen, and I wanted to see more. The movie left me wanting more in the best possible way. And again, I don't want to overhype it. If you go in with expectations that you just want to be entertained, I want to go sit in a darkened movie theater. I want to be engrossed in a film that's visually stunning with this amazing soundtrack in the background and just be transported to another place for 120 minutes. This film is absolutely succeeds on that level, and it's a potential franchise for Disney with endless possibilities of places they could go. From what I was told, there was a direct sequel. There were 2 scripts that were written for a sequel to Tron Legacy. There was a direct sequel that I believe was called Tron Ascension, which would have taken Sam and Cora, those characters, and continued their story in a sequel. And then there was another screenplay that was cheaper that didn't include those characters directly. And from what I hear, Tron ARES, they went the second route. I think this film was made on a $160 or $180 million budget, which is incredibly low by today's standards. They certainly spent the money on the special effects. They chose a rather small real-world setting, sticking with this one particular city, which I assume is supposed to be analogous to Seattle, but it was probably filmed up in Canada somewhere. I'd have to go and look it up to see where the exact location for this film was. But it looks like something from the Pacific Northwest, very much akin to where they are in the original Tron film. This could have been a major city in America. I don't think it was, and based off of how expensive it is to film movies here and why Trump wants to charge 100% tariffs on foreign-made films is understandable. But clearly they wanted to shoot a lot of this in the real world because it was cheaper to do so. That being said, even on a $160 to $180 million budget, it all ends up on screen and it looks absolutely spectacular. So it's a film that I am very much looking forward to going out and seeing in the theater again. And in terms of the Tron storytelling, it gave me everything in a Tron film that I was looking for. Time spent on a grid, real world characters ending up on the grid. We have an expansion of the lore and the storytelling with some amazing action and the possibility of other places to go with future films. This is probably one of my most anticipated movies of the year, and it didn't disappoint at all. I went in going and knowing exactly what I was looking for. I just want to be entertained with a good Tron movie, and I was entertained by a good Tron movie. Is it better than Legacy? I don't know. I'm almost hesitant to even go and put them on par with each other because they're 2 different types of films. A lot of times, and this is kind of the same way when it comes to the recent Star Wars movies. I'll kind of go and watch one depending on what my mood is. If I want to get into some heady Star Wars and sit back and just absorb like I'm eating Star Wars steak, I'll watch The Last Jedi. If I just want to be entertained and I want a popcorn Star Wars film that has a little bit of everything, I'll watch The Rise of Skywalker. If I, want to go and sort of get a taste of the original trilogy, but not watch the original trilogy, I'll go and I'll watch The Force Awakens. That's how I treat those films if I'm not watching them in order. But that's what I love about Tron ARES, is that it completely separates itself apart from the other films. So depending on what you're looking for, whether it's nostalgia fuel, it's the original Tron. If I want to spend just a bunch of time on the grid and be transported for 2 hours into a completely different place for the entirety of my movie watching experience, I'll go with Legacy. And if I want a bit of a combination of all of it, I'm going to go with Tron ARES. So if you've seen the film, drop me an email, talkshownerd@gmail.com, or leave a comment up on YouTube if you're enjoying this there, and I hope you'll follow me there and subscribe to the podcast. I would love to hear your thoughts. If you think that I'm a crackpot and you hated the movie and think that all of my reasons for liking it are ridiculous, feel free to let me know that as well. It's all subjective, and I'd love to hear from you. But I hope you'll go see this film. If you're a Depeche Mode fan, you absolutely need to see this. Film. So I think I'm going to go check movie times right now and see if I can't sneak in a screening between an event that I need to do coming up this weekend. So again, I want to hear from you. talkshownerd@gmail.com or leave a comment up on YouTube. So another Star Wars show will be back out next week. Oh, and by the way, there was a Star Wars show this week. So if you are listening to this podcast but haven't listened to this week's episode because this podcast kind of went afterwards, be sure to go back and listen to the other Star Wars show that I already did this week, so you don't miss out on that. And I'll be back again next week to talk Star Wars and perhaps a little bit of Tron, depending on if I hear from you. So thanks for checking this out. I hope you're doing well, and I'll talk to you next week. Bye.